A young mother and her 6-month-old baby vanished from Everglades National Park, sparking a frantic search operation. When teams found nothing, investigators were left with the grim conclusion that they had been lost to the swamp's apex predators. Welcome back to the Criminal Minds. Before we continue, thank you for being here. If you want more deep dives like this, hit subscribe. It's free, but for us it's real support and motivation to keep going. I appreciate you. The case remained frozen for a year, an official record with no final entry. That entry was finally written when hunters captured a python with a stomach so unnaturally swollen it defied belief, and the truth it contained was more horrific than any alligator attack. The asphalt parking lot near the entrance of Everglades National Park still radiated the store heat of the day even as a Florida sun dipped below the sawgrass horizon. It was Saturday, June 14th, 2015. Elena Marston leaned against the hood of her car, the metal warm beneath her palms. The air, thick and humid, was alive with the rising chorus of cicadas and the distant guttural bellows of alligators beginning their nightly routines. She checked her phone again. 8:15 p.m. The screen illuminated her face, highlighting the deepening lines of concern around her eyes. Her daughter, Serena Duval, 28, and her 6-month-old grandson, Landon, were supposed to have met her here over an hour ago. The sprawling parking area, bustling with tourist families and airboat operators just hours earlier, was now almost desolate. A few park ranger vehicles were parked near the entrance station, but otherwise, Elena was alone. She dialed Serena's number for the 6th time in 30 minutes. It went straight to voicemail. A cold knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. Serena was reliable, structured, meticulous in her planning, especially when it concerned Landon. She wouldn't simply forget the pickup time or let her phone die without warning. Elena scrolled through her photos, her thumb hovering over the image she had taken that very morning. It felt like a lifetime ago. Serena had been so vibrant, standing next to the large gray boulder supporting the official Everglades National Park sign. She wore a bright yellow sundress pattern with green flowers. A wide-brimmed straw sun hat protecting her fair skin from the harsh sun. Dark sunglasses obscured her eyes, but her smile was wide and genuine. Strapped securely to her chest in a soft gray-blue fabric carrier was Landon, beaming a wide, toothless grin at his grandmother. It had been the picture of a perfect day out. Now, as the last vestiges of twilight faded and the encroaching darkness seemed to amplify the wild sounds of the swamp, the image fell haunting. Elena pushed herself off the car and walked quickly toward the ranger station, gravel crunching under her shoes. Inside, the air conditioning was a sharp contrast to the heavy heat outside. She found a park ranger, Officer Daniels, finalizing the day's logs. Elena explained the situation, her voice trembling slightly as she relayed the details. Serena, 28. Landon, 6 months. They were supposed to be hiking the accessible trails, nothing strenuous. They had planned to spend the entire day, a much-needed escape from the pressures of Serena's life. As Officer Daniels began making the necessary calls, Serena's situation came into sharper focus. She was a widow. Her husband had died unexpectedly less than a year prior, leaving Serena to navigate new motherhood alone and financially precarious. The life insurance payout had been meager, forcing her back into part-time nursing shifts sooner than she had anticipated. She was exhausted, juggling the demands of the hospital and the sleepless nights of an infant, but she was fiercely independent. She rarely accepted financial help from Elena, determined to provide for Landon herself. This trip to the Everglades was meant to be a reset, a breath of fresh air after a grueling week. Elena had dropped him off at 10 a.m. Serena had insisted on exploring alone. She wanted a quiet time with her son. They had packed enough supplies: water, snacks, diapers, a small first aid kit. Serena respected the wilderness. She wasn't reckless. By 10 p.m., the entrance area was illuminated by flashing lights from the local police department. An official missing persons report was filed. As the oppressive darkness of the Florida night settled over the swamp, the search for Serena and Landon Duval began. Dawn broke over the Everglades on Sunday morning. The rising sun cut through the thick, humid air, promising another day of brutal heat. The search operation that had mobilized overnight was massive in scale. The disappearance of mother and infant triggered a multi-agency response that transformed the park entrance into a bustling command center. Local police, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, FWC, and National Park Service rangers coordinated their efforts. The air was thick with the sound of radio chatter, the roar of airboat engines, and the rhythmic thumping of helicopter blades. The initial strategy was straightforward. Focus on the area Serena was most likely to have visited. Elena Marston, pale and sleepless, provided investigators with Serena's intended route. Serena had planned to stick to the well-maintained boardwalk trails near the main entrance, popular areas heavily trafficked by tourists. It seemed impossible that someone could vanish from there without being seen or leaving a trace. Airboats skimmed the waterways in vast fields of sawgrass, their massive fans roaring. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging flew low grids over dense hammocks of trees, their sensors searching for any sign of human presence beneath the canopy. On the ground, teams of rangers, police officers, and volunteers began walking the trails, calling Serena's name. Their voices were swallowed by the immensity of the swamp. K-9 units brought in to track Serena sent from the parking lot struggled with the overwhelming sensory input of the swamp and the sheer number of people who had passed through the area over the weekend. Meanwhile, detectives began the background investigation. They needed to know who Serena was and whether there was any reason she might have chosen to disappear, or if someone might have had a motive to harm her. The picture that emerged was one of quiet resilience. Serena was a dedicated mother, universally liked by her colleagues at the hospital. Her financial struggles were evident in her bank statements. The strain of managing on a single part-time income was clear, but she was managing. There were no signs of depression, no secret relationships, no dangerous debts, no enemies. She was simply a young widow trying to build a life for her son. Her cell phone records provided little. The phone had last pinged a tower near the park entrance shortly after Elena dropped her off on Saturday morning. After that, the trail vanished, suggesting it was turned off, destroyed, or had moved out of range deep within the park early in the day. The first 48 hours were critical. Search teams pushed themselves to the limit, battling dehydration and exhaustion under the relentless sun. They found stray water bottles, discarded wrappers, even a child's shoe, but nothing belonged to Serena or Landon. On the third day, Tuesday, June 17th, the operation hit an unexpected obstacle. The command center had planned to expand the search grid into less popular, rugged trails and service access roads. But Detective Marcus Hale, the local police liaison, arrived at the briefing with urgent news. He explained that a private agricultural contractor had reported a catastrophic equipment failure during a pesticide application on land bordering the park. The overspray had leaked into the Everglades. The chemical was dangerous if inhaled or touched, and large portions of the plant expansion area were now officially closed. The decision devastated searchers. The contamination zone encompassed a large area directly adjacent to where Serena might have wandered if she had strayed off the main paths. Rangers pleaded for permission to enter with protective gear, but Hale was adamant. Regulations forbade it until specialists could assess and clear the area, a process that might take days or weeks. Instead, resources were diverted into deeper, less likely areas of the swamp. Helicopters scanned the contamination zone, but dense mangroves and cypress canopy made spotting anything nearly impossible. Days stretched into weeks. Despite hundreds of personnel and thousands of man-hours, not a single trace of Serena or Landon was found. No diaper bag, no shred of her yellow dress, no baby carrier. Nothing. For Elena Marston, it felt wrong. Serena would not have wandered recklessly into the deep swamp with her baby. The complete absence of evidence was haunting. After 2 weeks, the active search was scaled back. The prevailing theory was a tragic accident, that Serena and Landon had succumbed to the elements or wildlife. They remained scattered or submerged, lost forever to the swamp. Elena refused to accept it. She begged authorities to keep searching, especially in the pesticide zone, but the case stalled. Reports were filed. The disappearance of Serena and Landon Duval slipped into the archives of cold cases. A year passed. Silence from the Everglades remained absolute. The case of Serena and Landon Duval had gone completely cold. The initial flurry of activity, the massive search, the media coverage, it had all faded, leaving behind only the agonizing absence. For Elena Marston, the year was a blur of grief and frustration. She never accepted the official conclusion that her daughter and grandson had simply been lost to the swamp. She pressed authorities, hired private investigators, distributed flyers. But every lead collapsed into a dead end. Meanwhile, the Everglades ecosystem faced its own crisis. The invasive Burmese python was decimating local wildlife. In response, Florida authorized programs encouraging hunters to capture and remove the snakes. It was June 2015. Two experienced python hunters, Wyatt Jones and Garrett Brody, were deep in a remote grassy expanse of the Everglades, miles from the nearest road or tourist trail. They had been out since dawn, scanning the dense vegetation for the distinctive patterns of python skin. Late in the afternoon, as the light flattened under an overcast sky, Garrett spotted it. A massive Burmese python resting on a flat rock, partially obscured by tall grass. It was easily one of the largest they had ever encountered, over 16 feet long. But it wasn't the length that drew their attention. It was the girth. The snake's body bulged grotesquely, stretched tight around an immense meal. Wyatt slowed their swamp buggy, cutting the engine. Both men stared. Such a bulge usually meant a deer, a hog, maybe even an alligator. Either way, it was a significant capture. Gareth raised a specialized shotgun, fired once, and killed the snake instantly. They approached the carcass, astonished at its scale. The bulge was immense. Together, straining against the weight, they hauled it onto their buggy and secured it for transport. At an FWC check-in station, the snake measured 16 feet 4 inches, weighing 218 pounds. Standard procedure was to examine stomach contents to learn what these invasive predators were consuming. The hunters joked about the antlers they might find inside. Under buzzing fluorescent lights, Wyatt took a sharp knife and cut into the top belly. The smell hit first, an overpowering stench of decomposition, mixed with the musky acidity of digestive fluids. They peeled back layers of muscle and stomach lining. At first, the mass inside was unrecognizable, half-digested tissue and bone. Gareth reached in with gloves, tugging at something heavy lodged in the center. He expected a deer's haunch. But what emerged was not fur. It was pale, smooth skin. A human leg, severed at the hip. The men recoiled, horrified. Officer Ben Carter, the young biologist on duty, froze before rushing to his radio. "Dispatch! This is Everglade Station 7. We have human remains inside a python. We need homicide detectives and the medical examiner immediately." The check-in station became a crime scene. Investigators arrived quickly. Inside the python, they recovered additional remains, a partial torso, an arm. The remains were degraded but unmistakably human. DNA testing confirmed the nightmare. The body parts belonged to Serena Duval. The news hit Elena Marston like a physical blow. After a year of agonizing uncertainty, the fate of her daughter had been revealed in the most horrific way imaginable. But the discovery raised a darker question, one that eclipsed even the horror of the python. Where was Landon? The discovery of Serena Duval's remains inside the python galvanized the investigation. After lying dormant for nearly a year, the case was reopened and handed to a major crimes task force. The horrific nature of the discovery reignited media attention and public outrage. But amidst the gruesome details, one fact stood out. Inside the python, there were no traces of baby Landon. No clothing fragments, no bones, no remains at all. The medical examiner, Dr. Lydia Trent, conducted a thorough analysis. She confirmed what detectives suspected. The python hadn't killed Serena. There were no signs of constriction trauma, no crushed bones, no bruising typical of a python strike. More alarming, the remains showed signs of dismemberment before the snake had consumed them. Pythons don't tear apart their prey. Someone, or something, had. The prevailing theory was that alligators had dismembered Serena's body after she died, and the python later scavenged the parts. Alligators often stash prey underwater and tear it apart using violent death rolls. It was gruesome, but in the Everglades, it made sense. Still, inconsistencies nagged at investigators. The place where the python was captured wasn't prime alligator territory, and the trauma on the bones, though badly degraded, looked cleaner and more precise than expected from an alligator's tearing. To push further, detectives consulted a forensic anthropologist, Dr. Callum Price, an expert in decomposition and degraded remains. At the State Forensic Lab, he spent days under the microscope analyzing Serena's tissues and bones. That's when he found it. The cell walls in the tissue were ruptured in a way that had nothing to do with decomposition, Everglades heat, or python digestion. It was a pattern he knew well, the signature of freezing. When tissue is frozen solid, ice crystals puncture cell membranes. When thawed, the damage leaves a distinct, microscopic scar. Dr. Price confirmed the finding across multiple samples. His conclusion was shocking. Serena Duval's body had been frozen, likely in a commercial-grade freezer, for months before being dumped in the swamp. The implications hit like a bomb. Serena hadn't simply wandered into the Everglades and died of exposure. She had been murdered, preserved, dismembered, and deliberately disposed of. The python was never the predator. It was an accidental witness, exposing a crime meant to remain hidden. The realization reframed everything. Whoever killed Serena had resources, a freezer big enough to store a body, privacy to keep it hidden, and a callous calculation to preserve it for nearly a year. And most chilling of all, it raised a terrifying possibility. If Serena had been murdered, what happened to Landon? The revelation that Serena Duval had been frozen before her remains were dumped destroyed the old theories. The accident in the swamp, explanation no longer fit. This wasn't nature, it was calculated murder. Detectives now face a new challenge. The timeline. Serena disappeared in June 2015, but the forensic evidence suggested her body had been kept in cold storage for nearly a year. Whoever was responsible had deliberately preserved her until attention on the case faded. The investigation turned back to the original search. If Serena had been killed on the day she vanished, why hadn't search teams found anything in those critical first days? That's when Detective Elena Ruiz, from the Cold Case Unit, noticed something odd in the old files. The pesticide contamination zone. Back in June 2015, Detective Marcus Hale had announced that a pesticide spill made large sections of the search grid off limits. The decision had redirected ground teams away from a key area near Serena's last known location. At the time, it had been treated as an unfortunate coincidence. But with the new evidence, Ruiz felt something was off. She began verifying the pesticide report with the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, and Florida's agricultural regulators. The result was chilling. There was no record of any pesticide spill in the Everglades at that time. No incident reports. No cleanup records. Nothing. Ruiz then investigated the agricultural contractor named in Hale's report. The company didn't exist. The pesticide contamination zone had been fabricated, completely invented to block searchers from a specific area. That meant someone with authority had sabotaged the search. And the man who orchestrated it was Detective Marcus Hale. Ruiz presented her findings. Internal Affairs immediately launched a covert probe. Hale's finances were audited, his movements were tracked, and investigators discovered a disturbing pattern. Beginning the very week Serena vanished, Hale had received large, irregular cash deposits into hidden accounts. Over 2 years, the deposits totaled more than $150,000. The implication was unavoidable. Hale had been paid to obstruct the search. By whom and why? As Internal Affairs tightened its net, Hale grew nervous. One night, he broke into the police server room, attempting to rip out hard drives that contained the 2015 search records, the very evidence of his fabricated spill. But investigators were already watching. They caught him red-handed, pulling drives from the rack. Hale was arrested on the spot. The conspiracy was real. The pesticide zone had been a cover-up, and the question was no longer if, but who had been paying Detective Hale to bury the truth. The arrest of Detective Marcus Hale sent shockwaves through the department and the community. A sworn officer had faked a pesticide spill to derail a missing person search. An outrageous betrayal. But the bigger question loomed. Who was paying him? Internal Affairs, working with forensic accountants, followed the money trail. The deposits into Hale's accounts were carefully structured to avoid triggering federal reporting rules. They were funneled through shell businesses and small intermediaries. After months of digging, investigators traced the source, a Delaware shell corporation called Osprey Holdings Group. On paper, it had no real business operations. In practice, it existed to hide money. Subpoenas pierced the corporate veil, and behind the layers of paperwork, a name emerged, one that carried weight across South Florida: Victor Langford. Langford was a wealthy, politically connected real estate developer with vast holdings bordering the Everglades. Known for his lavish lifestyle, ruthless business dealings, and love of private hunting expeditions, his influence stretched deep into local politics. But what connection could such a man have to Serena Duval, a part-time nurse and young widow? On the surface, none. Their worlds were miles apart. But the financial link between Osprey Holdings and Hale was undeniable. Langford had the resources, the power, and the motive to cover something up. Detectives quietly began probing the Langfords. Attention soon shifted to Damien Langford, Victor's son, who was 18 at the time of Serena's disappearance. Damien was known for reckless behavior, fast cars, drinking, and illegal hunting trips in the Everglades. The suspicion was clear. Something had happened in the swamp, and Victor had used his money and influence to bury it. But suspicion wasn't proof. Detectives needed more than bank records. They needed a direct link tying the Langfords to Serena's death and to Landon's disappearance. For months, the investigation stalled against a wall of Langford wealth and power. And then in 2017, a breakthrough came from an unexpected place, half a world away. Interpol, working with Eastern European authorities, raided a human trafficking syndicate in Moldova. The network specialized in illicit adoptions for wealthy clients. Among the seized records was an encrypted file describing the smuggling of a 6-month-old American infant from Florida in late June 2015. The child's description matched Landon Duval, and the payment for the priority extraction, it came from an offshore account tied directly to Victor Langford's Osprey Holdings Group. The conspiracy was unraveling. Serena had been murdered, Hale had sabotaged the search, and Landon had been trafficked overseas. The truth was darker and more calculated than anyone had imagined. The evidence connecting Victor Langford to the disappearance of Serena and Landon Duval was staggering. The offshore wire transfers tied him to the trafficking network. The cash trail linked him to Detective Marcus Hale. The conspiracy was no longer rumor. It was fact. The next step was to bring the Langfords down. Investigators confronted Hale with the new evidence. Facing federal charges for corruption, obstruction, and potentially accessory to human trafficking, he broke. Hale confessed that Victor Langford had paid him to invent the pesticide spill. The goal was to steer search teams away from a remote service road near Langford property, the very place where Serena had last been seen. With Hale's confession, authorities secured warrants. A massive pre-dawn SWAT operation descended on the Langford estate, a sprawling, heavily secured compound bordering the Everglades. Inside, agents arrested Victor Langford in his study. He was calm, arrogant, even as handcuffs closed around his wrists. His son, Damien, reacted differently. Panicked, he bolted from the guest house, jumped into an off-road vehicle, and tore across the property toward the swamp. Helicopters tracked him with thermal cameras. Ground teams pursued through rugged terrain. The chase ended when Damien crashed near a canal and tried to flee on foot. He was tackled and taken into custody. The search of the Langford estate yielded the most damning evidence of all. Hidden behind a false wall in the villa's basement was a commercial-grade walk-in freezer. Though scrubbed clean, forensic teams recovered traces of Serena's DNA in the seals and drainage system. The freezer confirmed where her body had been kept for nearly a year. Confronted with overwhelming evidence, Damien finally cracked. In a tearful confession, he revealed what had really happened. On June 14, 2015, he had been driving recklessly along a service road in the Everglades, intoxicated from an illegal hunting trip. He struck Serena with his truck. She was knocked unconscious, bleeding heavily. Landon, strapped to her chest, miraculously survived unharmed. Terrified of a DUI manslaughter charge, Damien called his father. Victor Langford arrived and made a cold, ruthless decision. Instead of calling for help, he loaded Serena and the baby into his vehicle and took them back to the estate. There, Victor ensured Serena would never speak. He murdered her in the basement, then placed her body in the walk-in freezer. He paid Hale to divert the search. Weeks later, he arranged for baby Landon to be handed over to Gregor Volkov's trafficking ring, disguised as an illicit adoption. A year later, when public attention had faded, Victor dismembered Serena's frozen body and dumped the parts deep in the swamp. He never anticipated that a Burmese python would expose everything. With the freezer evidence, Hale's confession, and Damien's account, prosecutors had their case. But one urgent mission remained: finding Landon. Interpol, working with U.S. authorities, tracked the smuggling records. They identified the adoptive family in Eastern Europe. The family had been deceived, believing they were adopting a child legally. In 2017, authorities located Landon. He was 3 years old, healthy, safe, and completely unaware of the nightmare he had escaped. The reunion was emotional. Elena Marston flew overseas, trembling with both dread and hope. In a quiet government facility, the door opened. A social worker walked in, holding the hand of a small boy. The resemblance to Serena was unmistakable. Elena fell to her knees, tears streaming, as Landon ran into her arms. Justice followed swiftly. Victor and Damien Langford were convicted of murder, kidnapping, human trafficking, and conspiracy. Detective Marcus Hale received a lengthy prison sentence for his role in the cover-up. Elena returned to Florida with custody of Landon, vowing to raise him in memory of her daughter. Serena, a life stolen but not silenced.